Exar Kun's childhood is cloaked in mystery, his origins lost to time. What is clear is the extraordinary power that flowed through him, sensed by the Jedi Order and deemed too great to be left untapped. Taken to Dantooine, he began a path that promised discipline, but also stirred dangerous ambition. Even as a boy, his gaze carried intensity, a certainty that he was meant for more than simple study. In him, the Order saw potential for greatness. Yet within that same spark lay shadows of pride. His journey began as another child chosen by destiny. But already the seeds of defiance were sown, waiting for the right moment to grow. Under Master Vodo-Siosk Baas, Exar trained with fellow Padawans Freedon and Silvar, both fierce Cathar warriors. Their companionship masked underlying tension, for Exar viewed himself as superior. While Baas emphasized patience, unity, and respect, Exar's hunger for mastery burned hotter than his peers could understand. He pushed himself harder, drove his lightsaber with unmatched intensity, and measured himself not only against Freedon and Silvar, but even against his teacher. What began as shared lessons slowly became a proving ground for his ambition. To Exar, training was not just preparation, it was the first step toward claiming greatness, whatever the cost. Restlessness soon overcame discipline. Forbidden knowledge called to him, whispering from the shadows of the Jedi archives. Exar could not accept limits, and one night he crept into his master's quarters. Curiosity overpowering obedience. There he unlocked a holocron, its glow revealing fragments of dark history, tales of fallen Jedi, of Freedon Nadd's corruption, of power hidden behind locked doors. Yet before he could drink fully from this dangerous well, Master Baas discovered him. The holocron was taken, his curiosity rebuked, but the sting of reprimand only sharpened his thirst. What the Order denied him, he now craved above all else. Forbidden knowledge became a hunger too sharp to hide. The shadow of Freedon Nadd lingered in his thoughts, the glimpse of forbidden lore too intoxicating to forget. When Master Baas caught him, it was not only a scolding that Exar received, but also a wound to his pride. He had seen what others feared to look upon, touched secrets that could change the galaxy. Yet being restrained like a child filled him with resentment. Every word of warning from his master sounded like a chain meant to hold him back. In that moment, Exar's defiance began to outweigh obedience. A dangerous shift. When training turned to duels, Exar's arrogance was laid bare. Against Freedon, he fought with ease, dismissing his companion in moments, his lightsaber flashing with controlled fury. But against Silvar, the match burned hotter. He taunted her, mocking her Cathar heritage, words meant to sting and provoke. Rage filled her, and with claws unsheathed, she struck his face, carving scars he would carry forever. Shock gave way to fury, and Exar nearly cut her down before Master Baas intervened. The clash revealed more than skill. It exposed the pride and cruelty that now festered beneath his brilliance. His rise had already begun to twist. Silvar's claws flashed in a blur of fury, striking across Exar's face with the raw rage of the Cathar. Pain seared into him as blood marked his skin, the wound destined to become a permanent scar. For a moment, pride faltered, and the young Jedi stood stunned, not only by the strike itself, but by the humiliation of being bested through unrestrained emotion. His arrogance had provoked the beast within Silvar, and now he bore the evidence across his face. What should have been a lesson in restraint became instead a brand of shame, one that only deepened the storm already boiling in his heart. The shock of the scar dissolved into anger, and Exar's eyes burned with a darker flame. He surged forward, his strength overwhelming Silvar as his blade pressed closer to her defeat. His strikes grew reckless, fueled by fury rather than form, and soon he stood at the edge of murder. With a single motion, he could end her life. But before the fatal blow could fall, Master Baas intervened, his staff breaking the storm. In that moment, Exar's rage was caged, but the darkness he embraced was no longer hidden. It had revealed itself in full before his companions and master. Challenged by his own arrogance, Exar turned his fury against Vodo-Siosk Baas himself. The duel was fierce, his blade flashing against the simplicity of his master's wooden staff. Though Exar struck with speed and power, Baas deflected with calm precision, reading every weakness in his apprentice's form. A single strike sent Exar sprawling, humbled yet unbroken. Summoning his fallen lightsaber with the Force, he pressed the attack with dual blades, relentless and unyielding. Yet even in this contest, Baas met him with discipline, holding back the storm of his own student. It was not only skill on trial, it was Exar's very soul. Minutes dragged in a storm of strikes until Exar's will finally push through, his blades cutting through Baas's staff and forcing the master to yield. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The fight ended not by death but by acknowledgement. Master Baas, scarred not in body but in spirit, proclaimed Exar his greatest student. The words, meant as recognition, fell heavy with irony. For the triumph had been carved from arrogance and rage rather than balance. To Exar, it was validation of his destiny. To Baas, it was a warning that his brightest pupil was already walking the edge of a shadowed path. Victory turned swiftly into ambition. With his knighthood granted, Exar Kun stood at the threshold of new horizons. Yet peace on Dantooine could not contain him. The taste of forbidden knowledge lingered, and whispers of the Sith pulled at his thoughts. Freedon Nadd's legacy haunted him, calling him toward power hidden beyond Jedi restraint. Leaving behind his master and his companions, he took his starship, the Starstorm 1, and set his course for Onderon. The decision marked more than a journey across the galaxy. It was the first step away from the Jedi, a path that promised greatness but led only into darkness. With his starship carrying him away from Dantooine, Exar Kun's hunger led him to Onderon, a world steeped in ancient whispers of Sith power. There, Freedon Nadd's shadow lingered over the land, his tomb rumored to hold secrets lost to time. Exar came under the guise of a Jedi archaeologist, a mask that barely concealed his true ambition. The planet itself seemed to breathe with history, its stones echoing the dark reign of the fallen lord. For Exar, this was no academic pursuit, it was destiny calling. Each step across Onderon soil drew him further from the light, deeper into the promise of forbidden knowledge. In the city of Aziz, Exar encountered Jedi Keldroma and Deneva, custodians of a project transforming Nadd's relics into something safe, something the Order could contain. But Exar's eyes were fixed, not on duty but discovery. He demanded access to the Sith artifacts, desperate to study what they denied him. His pleas fell flat. To them, he was reckless, too eager, his hunger betraying the danger in his heart. Denied entry, barred from what he sought. Exar's frustration sharpened. The more the Jedi closed their doors, the more he believed true power waited for those bold enough to break them open. When Master Arkajeth arrived, the mask of civility was torn away. The venerable Jedi read the truth in Exar's deception, his thirst for darkness thinly veiled behind talk of study. With the authority of a teacher who had seen ambition turn to ruin before, Arca warned him, leave Onderon or be cast out entirely. To the Jedi, this was mercy, a chance to turn back before falling too far. But to Exar, it was chains again, another master dictating what he could and could not touch. He swallowed the threat, but in his heart, rebellion grew stronger. Defiance had become his creed. Alone in the streets of Aziz, opportunity revealed itself in the form of outcasts. Nebo and Rask, Sith sympathizers, drew the scorn of a crowd, mocked for praising Freedon Nadd's legacy. Where others saw heretics, Exar saw guides. He cut through the jeers with feigned compassion, pulling them to safety. In return, he demanded what they knew. Their whispers became revelations. Nadd's tomb rested not on Onderon itself, but on Exun, the jungle moon shrouded in danger. With the promise of gold, Exar secured their loyalty. To them, he was a curious Jedi. To him, they were stepping stones on the path to destiny. Guided by Nebo and Rask, Exar traveled to Exun. The jungle pressed in with suffocating weight, its beasts restless, its air thick with menace. Each step closer to Nadd's tomb was a test, as creatures bred to guard the resting place struck from the shadow. Exar cut through them with his blade, relentless, the thrill of combat mixing with the pull of the dark energy that seemed to thrum beneath the ground. At last, the temple rose before him, sealed in Mandalorian iron, daring him to enter. It was no longer merely a search, it was a challenge, a trial, and Exar would not be denied. The jungle of Exun rose like a living fortress, every shadow hiding teeth and claws. Exar pressed on alone, Nebo and Rask cowering far behind as creatures bred for death hurled themselves at him. His lightsaber carved arcs of brilliance through the gloom, each strike cutting down ravenous beasts that lunged to tear him apart. Blood and roars filled the air, but Exar did not falter. The more they came, the more he reveled in the challenge, his blade flashing with almost unnatural speed. By the time the last beast fell, the temple loomed ahead, silent and waiting, as though it had acknowledged his worthiness through trial by combat. The ancient tomb was sealed in a casing of Mandalorian iron, impervious to his lightsaber's strikes. Again and again, Exar hurled himself at the unyielding metal, frustration rising with every failure. Then the air thickened, a presence pressing against him, unseen yet undeniable. Power surged through his veins, not his own, but something ancient urging him forward. With a final strike, the barrier shattered, shards of Mandalorian iron crumbling before his will. For a fleeting moment, Exar heard the distant voice of his master, Vodo-Siosk Baas, urging him to stop. But pride drowned out caution, and he stepped deeper into the tomb. In the heart of the temple lay the corpse of Freedon Nadd, skeletal remains steeped in a darkness that refused to die. As Exar approached, the air cracked with unseen energy, and the spirit of the ancient Sith Lord rose from his bones. Cloaked in shadow, Nadd's presence filled the chamber, his voice slithering into Exar's thoughts. Where others might have recoiled, Exar stood transfixed. He had sought knowledge, and here it was, embodied in the spirit of a fallen master who promised secrets the Jedi forbade. The tomb was no longer just a relic, it was a threshold into something far more dangerous. Freedon Nadd's spirit offered gifts wrapped in poisoned scrolls of Sith lore hidden beneath the corpse, words etched with centuries of power. He spoke of destiny, of knowledge too vast for the Jedi to grasp, urging Exar to claim it. From beyond the grave, Master Boss's voice tried to pierce the haze, warning his former student to turn back. But curiosity had long since eclipsed restraint. Hands trembling not with fear but hunger, Exar pulled the scrolls free. The path before him was sealed. He told himself it was only knowledge, only study, but in truth, he had already stepped across the line. Scrolls in hand, Exar left the tomb only to be confronted by Nebo and Rask, their greed overcoming loyalty. They demanded the relics, their betrayal as quick as their desperation. Rage boiled within Exar, pride and power igniting like fire. His lightsaber flashed, cutting through their feeble resistance. Their screams were short, drowned beneath the hum of his blade. When silence fell, Exar looked down at their bodies and felt the weight of what he had done. For a moment, guilt twisted in him, but it did not last. Excitement surged. Instead, he had tasted the dark side's pull and found it intoxicating. The red sands of Korriban stretched before Exar Kun, desolate and heavy with dread. The Valley of the Dark Lords rose around him, tombs carved with ancient symbols, whispering a power long buried. He walked among the ruins with a strange awe, his eyes scanning the sarcophagi of forgotten Sith. Each step seemed to carry him deeper into a realm where the Force bent toward shadow. The silence was oppressive, yet within it pulsed a call, an invitation to claim the legacy of the dead. Here, Exar was no longer a seeker of knowledge, he was trespassing into the very cradle of darkness. The silence broke with movement. Corpses of long-dead pirates, strewn across the valley floor, twitched and rose, their bones snapping into unnatural motion. Dark energy swirled like a storm, animating the skeletal remains into mindless attackers. Exar's lightsaber ignited in a blaze of defiance, cutting through bone and shadow alike. Each strike was precise, but the horde pressed on, their hollow eyes unblinking. The clash was relentless, the air filled with the sound of cracking bone and searing plasma. For every skeleton that fell, Exar felt the weight of unseen eyes watching Sith spirits, whispering approval at his growing willingness to kill. Seeking escape, Exar turned toward his ship, only to be cut off by a landslide that thundered down the valley wall. Stones sealed the way back, trapping him inside the looming temple. Dust and silence followed, forcing him deeper into the tomb's darkness. The walls seemed to close in, the oppressive energy growing stronger with every step. He was no longer a visitor, he was a prisoner, compelled to follow the path the Force had laid. Each corridor led him closer to a destiny he both feared and craved, his every breath echoing with the knowledge that retreat was no longer possible. At the heart of the temple, a giant crystal pulsed with a sickly light, holding within it the trapped souls of fallen Jedi. Their voices cried out in agony, resonating through the chamber like a chorus of despair. For a moment, Exar hesitated, his hand reaching toward the crystal, sensing their suffering. But before he could act, the shadow of Freedon Nadd twisted the temple's energy, collapsing the chamber's roof. The crystal shattered, its glow extinguished, the Jedi spirits obliterated in a storm of destruction. Dust and fragments rained down, and Exar's body was crushed beneath the ruin, bones splintering under the weight. Pain like fire consumed him, his body broken in countless places. Exar screamed, the sound carrying beyond the tomb, a cry so fierce it traveled through the currents of the Force. Across the galaxy, Master Vodo-Siosk Baas heard the torment of his student. Closing his eyes, he reached out in meditation, weaving a fragile shield of light to protect Exar. For a fleeting moment, it held, but the power of Freedon Nadd struck back, manifesting aboard Baas's ship, breaking his concentration. Exar was left writhing, his voice echoing in the Force. Alone in agony, he teetered on the edge of life and death, his fate now resting with the darkness pressing in. Broken and gasping, Exar lay amid the rubble when the shadow of Freedon Nadd coiled around him once more. The Sith spirit's voice dripped with venom and promise, offering salvation in exchange for surrender. Every lesson of the Jedi told Exar to resist, but the agony of shattered bones and the lure of survival crushed his resolve. Pride refused to accept death in obscurity. With trembling defiance, he spat his answer. He would live, no matter the cost. In that vow, he opened himself to the dark side fully. Chains of light snapped, and Nadd's corruption flooded in like fire. Power surged through him, cruel and unrelenting. His bones reknit, nerves screamed, and muscles burned as they grew stronger. Exar's cries of torment echoed through the Force, so piercing that Jedi across the galaxy felt the shock of his suffering. Yet from the flames of agony, he rose, reborn. No longer broken, he stood taller, his body hardened, his will sharpened by the storm he had embraced. Where once stood a brilliant but arrogant Jedi, there now emerged something far more dangerous. A man who had tasted the dark side and found strength sweeter than any promise of peace. His steps carried him deeper, into chambers where Sith hounds lurked with glowing eyes and gnashing teeth. Exar lifted his blade, but when he reached for the light side, he felt nothing, its warmth was gone. The beast pounced, fangs tearing through shadows, forcing him into desperation. With hesitation fading, he reached instead into the darkness. Rage flared, his saber sang, and each precise slash cut the creatures down. For the first time, Exar fought not as a Jedi, but as something else, something the hounds themselves seemed to recognize. Their deaths marked by a grim acceptance of his transformation. In the silence that followed, whispers slithered through the tomb, voices of long-dead Sith lords. Their tones were not mocking, but approving. They praised his strength, his willingness to abandon restraint, his choice to wield anger as a weapon. The sound filled him with grim satisfaction. Exar Kun was no longer reaching for shadows. He was being welcomed into their ranks. The darkness had ceased to be an enemy. It was now his ally, binding him to a legacy that stretched back for millennia. Every whisper was both a curse and a coronation, sealing the path he could no longer escape. Guided by the specter of Nadd, Exar's journey led him to Yavin 4. The Sith spirit urged caution, warning him of the Massassi, a race twisted by Sith alchemy into loyal monsters. But Exar's arrogance brushed aside even spectral warnings. To him, every challenge was an opportunity to prove mastery. As his ship descended through the thick atmosphere, ancient temples loomed through the jungle mist, monuments to a legacy drenched in shadow. He stepped onto the soil of Yavin not as an intruder, but as an heir. In his heart, he no longer sought knowledge alone, he sought dominion. The jungles of Yavin closed in as Exar pressed deeper, but he was not alone for long. Out of the shadows surged the Massassi, monstrous descendants twisted by Sith alchemy. Their numbers overwhelmed him, crude weapons striking hard, until even his saber could not carve a path free. Bound in chains, he was dragged through vine-choked ruins to a crumbling temple. There, robed priests studied him with reverence and malice, sensing the storm of power that churned within him. To them, he was no guest, but an offering fuel for their dark rites. The Jedi Knight was now a prisoner in the House of Shadows, cold stone pressed against his back as they chained him to a blood-stained altar. The priests began their chant, summoning energy that thickened the air until it crackled with dread. From beneath the temple floor, the ground shook and split open. A massive war beast, wrought by Naga Sadow's alchemy, clawed its way to the surface. Its bulk eclipsed the chamber, its roar shaking the walls. The chains bit into Exar's wrists as he struggled, the realization dawning that he was meant to die as a sacrifice. But fear quickly curdled into defiance he would not be offered. He would conquer. The beast's claws closed around him, squeezing the life from his body. Darkness swam in his vision, and in that suffocating moment, Freedon Nadd whispered again, "Surrender and live." With the last of his will, Exar abandoned resistance, throwing himself wholly into the abyss of the dark side. Rage ignited, hatred sharpened into focus, and words in the Sith tongue spilled from his lips unbidden. The amulet of Naga Sadow, carried by the priest, ripped free and flew into his grasp. The ancient relic pulsed with raw power, amplifying his fury 1,000-fold. In its glow, Exar Kun was reborn. Energy surged through him like wildfire. He unleashed a storm of power, a beam of searing darkness that tore into the war beast's hide, burning flesh and bone until the monster collapsed in shrieks that shook the temple. The force of the blast consumed the chamber, cutting down scores of Massassi, who screamed as their bodies withered under its fury. Those who survived fell to their knees, trembling, no longer captors but worshippers. Exar Kun, once their victim, now stood as their master. With the amulet blazing on his chest, he had proven himself stronger than death, stronger than destiny. Freedon Nadd appeared again, expecting obedience, expecting gratitude. But Exar's eyes burned with contempt. No longer willing to be bound by another's voice, he raised the amulet and focused his energy. A torrent of dark fire engulfed the spirit, ripping it apart. Freedon Nadd's shriek echoed through the temple as his essence was obliterated, cast into oblivion for the second and final time. Silence followed, broken only by the chants of Massassi, who now revered Exar as their god king. He had not only claimed power, he had defied the one who offered it, proving that no master, living or dead, would rule him. With Freedon Nadd obliterated, Exar Kun stood triumphant among the shattered temple stones. The Massassi bowed low, their chants rising like thunder, hailing him as master and god. From that moment, Yavin 4 was no longer a place of exile, but the heart of his dominion. He commanded the construction of colossal temples in the likeness of ancient Sith designs, each structure intended to draw and concentrate the power of the dark side. Monuments rose in his image, carved with crude reverence by Massassi hands. The jungle trembled beneath his will, and the once forgotten moon was remade as a cradle of darkness. Among these creations, one temple surpassed the rest, the Palace of the Wulam. Within its stone walls, Exar built a golden sphere, a device that consumed the souls of Massassi children, feeding his strength and bending the race to his will. He turned their devotion into slavery, their worship into fuel, and still it was not enough. In hidden chambers, Exar experimented with Sith alchemy, fusing flesh with power, reshaping the Massassi into abominations that embodied his hunger. Each success brought him closer to the legacy of Naga Sadow, and each experiment pulled him deeper into the abyss of cruelty. The path led him into the pit where once a beast had guarded secrets. Descending into shadow, he uncovered a vast hangar long hidden by the earth. There, untouched by time, rested Naga Sadow's flagship, the Corsair. Its blackened hull and terrible design radiated ancient menace, a relic of Sith conquest preserved in silence. Alongside the ship lay an alchemy lab filled with scrolls and devices, a treasure trove of forbidden science. Exar's eyes burned with fascination. The Corsair was more than a vessel, it was a weapon, and the lab a forge. With these, his reach would stretch beyond Yavin into the stars. Hungry to test the secrets of the alchemists, Exar turned to one of his priests, convincing him that the ritual would be painless, that it would grant glory. But lies cloaked horror. The Massassi was strapped into a device of wires and stone while Exar summoned the dark power of the temple. Bones cracked, muscles swelled, and his flesh hardened into metallic hide. Claws sprouted, and eyes burned with unnatural fire. The priest's screams echoed through the halls until only a monstrous warrior remained. Exar smiled at the sight, calling it success. To him, pain was irrelevant. Only power mattered, no matter the cost. With the Corsair ready, Exar left Yavin to strike at the galaxy beyond. His course took him to the Empress Teta system, where he confronted Alima Keto and Ulic Keldroma. Their sorcery and defiance challenged his claim, yet Exar strode into the Iron Citadel with the amulet blazing at his chest. Alima's illusions crumbled before a single surge of his power, and Ulic's saber met his in a clash that shook the halls. The duel raged, neither gaining ground, until a vision consumed them both. The shade of an ancient Sith Lord marking Exar as Dark Lord, and binding Ulic as his apprentice. The Brotherhood of the Sith was born in fire and betrayal. As Exar's saber clashed with Ulic's in time, the power of their amulets ignited a storm of Force energy. Darkness swirled into vision, and before them stood a figure clad in horned armor, a phantom of the ancient Sith Empire. The voice of the long-dead master thundered, declaring Exar the new Dark Lord of the Sith, branding his forehead with the mark of ancient power. To Ulic, the phantom decreed servitude, naming him apprentice to Exar's reign. The vision seared into their souls, binding master and disciple in destiny. When the storm faded, the two clasped hands, their pact forged not in trust, but in shadow. The Brotherhood of the Sith was born, its strength rooted in conquest. Exar, crowned by the vision, and Ulic, tempered by his own ambition, pledged to bring the galaxy to its knees. Together, they vowed to spread the reach of the dark side across systems, binding armies with sorcery and steel. Exar's pride swelled at the thought he was no longer a seeker of knowledge, no longer a pretender in forbidden halls. He was the master, the voice of the Sith reborn. With Ulic as his weapon and the Massassi as his slaves, the galaxy itself would soon tremble at their coming war. To fuel his crusade, Exar unveiled horrors from Yavin's archives. Among them was the Dark Reaper, an ancient Sith superweapon of devastating might. Coupled with his own creation, the Force Harvester, it became a machine of pure destruction. Together, they drained the life force of armies, transmuting it into a searing beam of annihilation. Cities crumbled, defenders fell, and resistance melted beneath its power. For 6 months, the Dark Reaper carved its path across the Empress Teta system, securing victory after victory. To Exar, it was not only conquest, it was proof that the Sith would endure their vengeance etched in fire. But even as he tightened his grip, Exar sought more. Cloaked once more as a Jedi, he traveled to Ossus, the great library world, preaching to restless students. He told them their masters denied them true knowledge, hoarding forbidden power. He claimed he alone could grant them what the Order refused. To prove his words, he displayed his amulet, showing a vision of Freedon Nadd's spirit, destroyed, twisting truth into a lie of justice. To the impressionable, he seemed a savior. In truth, he planted corruption, preparing to bend the next generation of Jedi into tools of his brotherhood. In the archives, Exar confronted Odan-Ur, the frail but wise keeper of Jedi lore. The ancient master, sensing the corruption within him, raised the light in defense, but his strength was little against the storm of Exar's power amplified through the amulet. With contempt, Exar struck him down, the old Jedi falling in silence. As his life ended, the Sith Lord claimed the holocron Odan-Ur had guarded, its crimson glow pulsing with secrets of the dark. Students rushed in, but Exar's lie was swift. He claimed Odin had gifted him the relic before passing naturally. Some believed, and in that moment, more Jedi unknowingly swore loyalty to the new Dark Lord. With Odan-Ur slain, Exar turned from the archives not as a thief, but as a prophet in the eyes of the impressionable. To the young Jedi who had gathered, he spoke of freedom, of breaking chains their masters had forged through fear of forbidden truths. His words, sharpened with half-truths and veiled lies, struck deep. Some hesitated, but many followed, eager for the power he promised. Among them were faces he once called peers, friends who now looked at him with reverence instead of suspicion. By the time he departed Ossus, he had won not just a relic, but the loyalty of nearly 20 Jedi, ready to march into shadow. On Yavin 4, the Brotherhood was bound together in ritual. Exar shattered the Sith holocron, releasing spirits long dead into the air like purple mist. Shards of the broken crystal pierced the hands of his followers, embedding corruption directly into their flesh. Through those shards, the spirits of the Sith whispered, feeding their thoughts with promises of dominion, bending their loyalty until they no longer served the Jedi but the Brotherhood. Credo, Silvar's mate, stood firm by Exar's side, while others fell fully into darkness. In that moment, the Jedi ceased to exist among them. They were Sith now, and Exar Kun was their lord. From Yavin, his command echoed through the temples, and the Brotherhood took form as an army of dark acolytes. Each Jedi he had swayed became both soldier and assassin, tasked with striking at the very masters who had trained them. Massassi worshippers guarded the temples, while Sith magic bound the group tighter in loyalty and fear. Exar, seated atop his throne, declared Yavin 4 the seat of his empire. What had begun as a search for knowledge had become a kingdom, rooted in deception and blood. The Brotherhood of the Sith was no longer a dream, it was a weapon ready to strike the galaxy. When word reached him that Ulic had been captured and paraded before the Republic on Coruscant, Exar seized the opportunity. With Mandalore at his side and Massassi warriors at his command, he stormed the Senate itself. Sith sorcery froze senators in terror as Exar freed Ulic, raising him high as ally and apprentice once more. Yet amidst the chaos, a familiar figure barred his path, Master Vodo-Siosk Baas, unyielding as ever. He urged Exar to abandon this madness, to return to the light. But Exar's heart was already locked in shadow. The time for words had ended. Their fates would be settled in combat. Lightsaber clashed against wooden staff once again, but this duel was no training exercise. Baas fought with all the skill of a master, his staff holding steady against Exar's furious assault. Yet this time, Exar carried something new. With a flourish, he ignited a second blade from the opposite end of his weapon, a double-bladed saber unseen before by Jedi eyes. The tide shifted. Exar pressed harder, his weapon a storm of light and fury. Baas held only long enough to speak his final warning, that this would not be their last battle. But Exar's strike shattered the staff and cut his master down. Vodo-Siosk Baas became one with the Force, leaving his student triumphant, yet consumed entirely by the darkness he once swore to resist. The Brotherhood of the Sith spread like wildfire across the galaxy. With Mandalorian armies bolstering their strength and Exar's dark sorcery empowering their assaults, system after system fell into ruin. Republic fleets buckled under the relentless strikes, their defenders scattered and overwhelmed. The Dark Reapers scorched planets, draining life itself to feed Exar's war machine. The Jedi, crippled by assassinations of their greatest masters, faltered under the onslaught. Every victory fed Exar's pride. Every conquest confirmed his belief that the Age of the Sith had truly returned. The Republic's golden walls cracked, and shadows swept across the stars. But within the Brotherhood lurked betrayal. Alima Keto, ever ambitious, took command of Naga Sadow's Corsair alongside Credo. Exar allowed it, knowing treachery would be its own punishment. In the Kron cluster, the Corsair unleashed its superweapon, collapsing a star and triggering a chain reaction of supernovae. The system ignited in a storm of destruction, annihilating both Jedi fleets and Alima herself. Credo perished at her side, a pawn sacrificed in Exar's larger game. The blast scarred the galaxy, but for Exar it was a diversion. While others burned, his eyes turned toward Ossus, the true prize waiting to be plundered. Panic consumed Ossus as news of the Kron supernova reached its scholars. Evacuations filled the skies, Jedi scrambling to save relics from their great library. Into this chaos descended Exar Kun, stepping from his starship as though claiming conquered land. The Massassi swarmed behind him, seizing tomes, holocrons, and artifacts. To Exar, it was more than theft, it was inheritance. He ordered treasures loaded onto ships, each stolen relic a weapon for his future. The Library of Ossus, once a beacon of Jedi knowledge, now burned beneath Sith banners. What centuries had preserved, Exar stripped away in hours. Resistance rose in the form of Master Udminar, ancient and rooted in the Force. He barred Exar's path, igniting his lightsaber, though his frail frame trembled with age. Exar laughed, igniting his double-bladed weapon, and the duel erupted among the vaults. Despite his skill, Ud faltered beneath the ferocity of the Dark Lord. Massassi guardians swarmed, pressing the Master into desperation. But Ud did not fight for victory, he fought for time. Each parry, each strike delayed Exar, his eyes searching for a way to protect the artifacts from Sith corruption. His defiance was quiet, but unbreakable. In his final act, Ud drew upon the Force, rooting himself into the ground. His body transformed, bark spreading across his skin, limbs stretching into branches as he became a living tree. Roots wrapped around the relics, shielding them even as Exar's fury struck him down. Immovable, Ud's sacrifice preserved what Exar craved most. Though denied this prize, Exar took enough to consider the raid a triumph. Leaving Ossus in flames, he rose into the skies, victory ringing hollow even in his own heart. Behind him, the Jedi mourn not just a master, but the very soul of their order now scarred by fire. Betrayal struck when Ulic, broken by guilt and stripped of the Force by Nomi Sunrider, revealed Exar Kun's refuge on Yavin 4. Thousands of Jedi ships descended, blotting out the skies with their engines' roar. Exar stood upon his temple, basking in false confidence, believing himself untouchable. Yet the wall of light the Jedi conjured closed around the moon, suffocating the dark side's reach. Even he, Dark Lord of the Sith, knew he could not withstand the United Order in battle. To escape, he turned to a ritual whispered of in forbidden texts, one final gamble to defy death itself. Inside the temple of Exar Kun, Massassi thronged in terror and reverence as their master chained himself to the altar. One by one, he ordered them to step forward, their blood spilled in sacrifice. Each death fed the artifacts arranged in the chamber, dark relics that pulsed brighter with every soul consumed. The temple shook as waves of energy built, flames rising from the stones. The screams of the Massassi filled the air, not as rebellion, but as worship. In their slaughter, Exar reached for eternity. His body trembled, his spirit clawing free of its mortal prison. The ritual climaxed in fury. Fire consumed the temple as the wall of light clashed against the tide of darkness pouring from within. Exar's body disintegrated, seared away by the inferno. Yet his spirit, unbound, lingered, drifting above the carnage. For a heartbeat, he laughed, believing he had won victory over mortality. But laughter turned to silence as he realized the truth. He was cut off from the galaxy, chained to the ruins of his own making. The temple stood engulfed in fire, Yavin's jungles burned, and the war he had built crumbled with him. Exar Kun's body was gone, but his soul remained trapped in eternal twilight. The ruins of Yavin became his prison, the temple walls his cage. In the void beyond flesh, fear came for the first time. No army, no apprentice, no power could reach him now. For centuries, his voice echoed unheard in empty halls, a shadow mourning its own ambition. The galaxy moved on, leaving him forgotten. Yet his spirit endured, locked away, neither alive nor truly dead, waiting for the moment when chance might brush against his darkness once again. Millennia passed, the galaxy reshaped by wars he could no longer touch. But from time to time, flickers of life brushed against his slumber. During the Great Galactic War, he stirred faintly, a phantom wandering Yavin's jungles, frightening soldiers with hollow apparitions. Later, when rebels built their base upon his temple, he awoke again, weak but eager, briefly possessing soldiers to drain their strength. Each awakening was short, leaving him to drift back into silence. Yet in every moment of conflict, every tremor of the Force, Exar Kun reached out from the abyss. Forgotten, but never gone, he lingered an eternal scar upon Yavin 4. When the rebellion made Yavin 4 its base, Exar Kun stirred from his prison. His spirit slithered through the walls of his temple, brushing against the minds of soldiers. At first, they felt only unease, but soon his will pressed harder, seizing control of weak minds. A handful of rebels staggered like puppets, eyes vacant as Exar drained their energy to feed his strength. But possession left scars, soldiers collapsed lifeless, their comrades whispering of shadows in the stone. Though the Alliance soon abandoned Yavin, the Dark Lord tasted life again, enough to remind him that patience could be a weapon as sharp as any blade. Centuries later, a Corellian expedition awoke him fully. Archaeologists digging too deep found the catacombs beneath his throne room, their curiosity sealing their doom. Exar crushed their minds one by one, reshaping them into zealots devoted to his worship. Thus, the cult of Exar Kun was born, chanting in darkness, raising his name as though he still lived. For a brief time, it seemed the Sith Lord might claw his way back into the galaxy. But their faith could not shield them. Mercenaries stormed the ruins, slaughtering the cultists. Exar's fragile form, woven from shadows, shattered again, cast back into the abyss. Yet he endured, drifting until he found a new vessel in the mind of Gantoris, one of Luke Skywalker's apprentices. In dreams, Exar appeared as the Dark Man, whispering promises of power beyond his master's restraint. Gantoris resisted at first, but pride and impatience festered. The Sith spirit taught him forbidden knowledge, guiding his hand to forge a double-bladed lightsaber echoing Exar's own weapon. But when the apprentice finally discovered the truth, it was too late. Exar's grip tightened, and with a surge of power, he incinerated Gantoris from within, leaving only ash. Another life claimed, another step closer to strength. After Gantoris, Exar turned to Kip Duran, a prodigy brimming with raw force potential. He appeared in the cracks of the temple walls as an oily shadow, offering what Luke denied, vengeance and the power to claim it. Kip listened, wounded by his past and hungry for justice. Exar fanned that hunger into rage, teaching him Sith lore and binding him with promises of greatness. Soon, Kip accepted him fully, calling himself a Dark Lord. Through Kip, Exar tasted power again, twisting the boy into his greatest weapon, a living apprentice to continue the war he had begun millennia before. With Kip as his vessel, Exar's ambitions reached new heights. Together, they pulled the Sun Crusher, a weapon of catastrophic power, into their grasp. The ancient Sith Lord whispered guidance, bolstering Kip's strength until he wielded the Force with terrifying precision. When Luke confronted them, Exar revealed himself openly, smothering the Jedi Master's defenses. Kip's lightning struck with Exar's will behind it, shadows piercing Luke's body, leaving him broken and comatose. For the first time in millennia, Exar Kun stood victorious against a Skywalker, his laughter echoing in the halls of his temple. The Dark Lord had returned, if only in spirit. Lightning and shadow ripped through Luke Skywalker's defenses as Exar Kun and his pawn, Kip Duran, struck in unison. Shadows from the temple walls pierced flesh, and Luke collapsed, his body comatose, his spirit ripped from the living world. He awoke, trapped within the very halls of Exar Kun's temple, face to face with the Sith Lord's spectral form. Exar mocked him, parading his failures, promising that his new Jedi Order would fall. For the first time, Luke felt the full weight of a millennia-old darkness pressing against his soul. Imprisoned in the same abyss that had caged Exar for centuries, while Luke's body lay broken, his apprentices rallied. Young, inexperienced, but united, they formed a circle of light within the temple, hands joined, wills bound together. Exar's spirit descended upon them like a storm, summoning winds and darkness to choke the candles and crush their resolve. He taunted them with fears and insecurities, striking at their weakest thoughts. But their bond held, and a glow emerged faint at first, then blinding. Their circle became a conduit of the Force, pure and unwavering, resisting the Shadow's claws. For the first time since his rebirth, Exar Kun felt the cold hand of fear. Into the circle stepped not only Luke's spirit, but the guiding presences of Jedi long gone. Vodo-Siosk Baas appeared, his staff shining like a beacon. Joined by other masters of the past. Their strength blended with the students, and Luke himself added his will, anchoring them. Together, the living and the dead formed a wall no darkness could penetrate. Exar hurled his fury against them, but their unity only grew brighter. Surrounded by light, his voice turned to screams. He, who once defied masters and slaughtered armies, now found himself powerless before the combined will of Jedi across generations. The pressure mounted until Exar's shadow cracked, his form splintered, fragments peeling away like shards of broken glass. He writhed in desperation, clawing for a vessel, searching for weakness in the circle, but found none. The cyclone of light pulled him upward, each fragment shredded by the Force itself. Cast into the void of space, his essence scattered like dust, carried on invisible winds into the abyss. For the first time in 4,000 years, the galaxy was free of his grip. The temple grew silent, the storm ceased, and only the Jedi's ragged breathing remained within the circle. Silence became finality. The fragments of Exar Kun, once the most feared Dark Lord of the Sith, were erased from existence. No cult could summon him. No artifact could restore him. His reign of terror, stretching from the Great Sith War to Luke Skywalker's era, ended in a single act of unity. The apprentices lowered their hands, their bond still humming with the glow of triumph. Luke opened his eyes. Body and spirit restored. Freed by his students' courage, the nightmare had passed. Exar Kun's shadow was gone. Not merely defeated, but destroyed. After 4 millennia, the Dark Lord was no more.